Hey listeners, thanks for tuning in to the Grow Wire podcast, and I'm glad you did, because on this episode we're sitting down with legendary venture capitalist and software entrepreneur Ann Winblad. She's the co-founder and managing director at Hummer-Winblad Venture Partners. Ann and I talk all about the venture capital business, how she got her start, selling her first company, raising money for a VC fund, and what's going on in technology today. You are going to enjoy our conversation.
You're listening to the Grow Wire podcast, a place where you'll learn the ins and outs of growing a business, running a business, or even taking your big idea, career, or personal development to the next level. It's all possible. Our host, Jason Maynard, the SVP of Marketing at Oracle NetSuite and the editor-in-chief of GrowWire.com, will take you on an exploration of growth through candid conversations with some of the most brilliant minds in entrepreneurship, entertainment, business development, and more. Whatever your goal, we know you'll walk away with the right tools to help fuel your own journey of growth.
Before we dive into this episode with Ann, I want to thank our sponsors over at Blue Microphones. The holidays are right around the corner, and what's better than giving the gift of storytelling? Everyone has a story to tell, and Blue Microphones is known for their iconic Yeti microphone, which has helped millions and millions of people find and amplify their voices to tell their story. So if you or someone on your maybe holiday gift list is thinking about creating a podcast, well, check out Blue's new YetiCaster, the complete mic and boom arm system ready to connect to your laptop, bringing the ultimate broadcast studio setup to your home or office. That's what we use here at the Grow Wire Studios, and we are stoked. Bringing that same cheer to your loved one this holiday season? Well, visit bluedesigns.com and use the code podcast at checkout for a special Grow Wire holiday edition price. And while we're talking about Blue Microphones, make sure you head over to our website, growwire.com, for the latest episode of the Grow Wire show about, wait for it, Blue Microphones. Yeah. Watch the new episode to find out how they're becoming one of the most renowned audio production companies. They're literally calling me right now, and the success and struggles they face to become the standard in their industry. All right, well, welcome to the Grow Wire podcast. I'm Jason Maynard, and we are recording today from the very gray of San Francisco. We are at Pier 33, the Alcatraz landing. So if you hear some horns or people screaming, they're probably here in San Francisco on vacation. But I'm with a very special guest, the one and only. She's one of the most legendary venture capitalists of all time. I consider her a great friend of mine, and I'm always honored to spend some time and learn from her. Ann Winblad, the co-founder and managing director of Hummer-Winblad. Ann, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
It's so cool to get to do this with you. So we've had so many conversations over the years. I'm glad we get to put it on the recording button.
And I'm glad you clarified that these screaming and sounds are not entrepreneurs running from our office above the Alcatraz Pier, but the Alcatraz ferry itself.
People are clamoring to get in here.
They are.
Your track record's so good. They're like, we need to take your money. We need to take the Hummer-Winblad money, right, to grow. So.
Well, not everybody's clamoring. We're what's called a focus fund.
There you go.
And we focus only on software. When we first got started, that was a really tiny area. That was 29 years ago. And that year, there was only $350 million invested in software companies globally. Last quarter, there was $60 billion invested globally by venture capitalists in everything. And about 42% of that was software.
It's crazy only. How much this has grown over the years.
Crazy, yeah.
Well, we've got Ann for a little while today. We're going to talk about her past. We're going to talk about how you built your firm, and then obviously what you see is going on in the future. But I'd love to get started and just kind of, how did you break into technology? I don't think I've ever heard that story firsthand. How did you get into this business?
Well, when you read about Silicon Valley, you read about people that have gone to Harvard, Stanford, maybe even Berkeley. But I'm a Minnesota girl, and I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, went to the University of St. Thomas, have an undergraduate degree in mathematics and in business, and the equivalent of a minor in computer science.
You were ahead of your time.
Well, I was a little behind. I learned to code in college on a DEC VAX. Bill Gates was in high school at the time, and he was learning on the same machine. So he was not only 5 years younger than me, but about 7 years ahead of me in learning how to code. So it's pretty late to learn how to code in college and enter the tech industry. But when I graduated, it was a really interesting year for women, that they wanted to hire more women. It was called Affirmative Action Year. And I was a prize woman because I had that math degree, I knew how to code, and I had my business degree. So I had tons of job interviews, from the FBI to a 3M plant manager. But the job I took was as a systems analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis.
You worked for the I didn't realize you worked for the Fed.
Yeah, I worked for the Fed for a huge 13 months. And it was because I worked at the Fed that I was able to start a software company. Everybody came to work at about 8:30, and at 5 o'clock, no matter what we were working on, everybody went home.
Oh my gosh.
And that really was an indicator to me that I wasn't really fit for a job. And I actually didn't know what an entrepreneur was. My dad was a high school basketball coach, my mom a nurse, no relatives were entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
But this concept of sort of creating your own thing and really going for it is what drove me to start a software company.
Well, that's what I mean. So you started then a software company. How did you decide you were going to do that?
Well, I decided that I didn't want to work at the Fed, number
Yeah.
one. So I've always been someone that looks at the glass half full versus half empty. So instead of looking at what I didn't like, I thought, what do I really like? And I love the projects we were working on.
Yeah.
I love the big projects. And I would have stayed there till 10 at night to keep working on my project. And
They wanted you out of the building, though, right?
They did want us out of the building. They
Yeah.
really did. And everybody wanted to leave the building.
Yeah.
So it was kind of lonely to be there by yourself. But I convinced 3 of the top programmers there, one in particular, two of them took a year sabbatical to try a startup with me, and the other guy quit his job and joined it. So there were 4 of us.
Did you start it in Minnesota or Minneapolis?
In Minneapolis,
Oh, wow.
yes. And we started a company that we called Open Systems.
Oh my gosh.
And
You were way ahead of your time on the naming conventions,
We were,
right?
and also we were on open source. So we didn't have any money. I still had student loans. I'm 24 at the time. And so we had to create some way to earn money to fund our company. And in 1974, venture capitalists wouldn't touch software. You know, there's a reason it's called Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Software was this kind of mystical thing. Very little software was sold direct. It was bundled onto machines. So we responded to a request for a proposal for a student accounting system for one of the vocational schools.
Oh my gosh.
And we won the contract. They were a little shocked when a 24-year-old showed up and said, "It's me, I won the contract." And that financed the company. So we wrote that software during the day, and at night, you also know you're a great software entrepreneur if you like to work at night.
Yeah.
At night, we decided that we would write accounting software, and
wow.
which we did. And when you ask about being called Open Systems, we also gave away our source code
Oh, geez.
so that people could write specialty packages. We just had generalized accounting, but if you were in the moving and storage business or you were a financial services company, you needed some special modules. So we actually got other, what we called value-added resellers, to write those pieces.
Oh,
and they
wow.
paid us for our core, our open source piece. And we wrote it in modules so that they could adopt those modules for their own modules.
It's like that's like the business model of the entire industry, basically, today.
Yeah,
right?
it is today.
Yeah.
And it was very controversial. We are, at one point in time, we were the 16th largest software company in the world, and we had less than 20 million in revenues. People forget that when Microsoft went public in 1985, that their revenues were below 100 million.
Yeah.
So having a $20 million software company was a big deal,
Yeah.
although we weren't quite there yet either.
That's funny. So now you ended up selling Open Systems then.
We did.
Yeah. What was that like? I mean, because you're just getting started in your career. You build a company. What prompted you to sell? I'm curious.
There were 3 things that prompted us to sell, and it's a real good lesson that I've taken back to our own investments as a venture capitalist. One is that growing and rapidly growing a company is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
And your team has to come along with you. You can't just have the CEO saying, we're going to win it, and we're going to win it big. You really have to put in the time, the energy, and have the vision for being big. And a lot of companies don't want to be big, and that's okay. And I discovered along the way that my co-founders really loved their jobs, but the concept of world domination was not something that they were aiming for. And I was.
Yeah.
I really loved the software industry.
Yeah.
They loved open systems. I really loved the idea that I was in an industry that was growing really rapidly, that there were so many interesting people I met, that were all about my age at that time, starting the software industry. And that that didn't ring their chimes. It just wasn't what drove them.
Yeah.
They loved building good product. They loved having great customers. So we actually brought in a psychologist.
Oh, wow.
And the four of us were interviewed about what do we want to do with our futures. And it became very clear then that, I wanted to go for the World Cup, and they wanted to play town ball.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. It's one of those things where you see it a lot with companies, right, that you've probably seen over the years, that the team that maybe founds and builds off the idea is not necessarily the one that executes it all the way to scale. So you got to know that going in.
But that doesn't mean you give up. And
Yeah.
so we had companies coming to us and saying, we'd like to buy you. We never raised outside capital. We were extremely profitable. Everybody made good salaries. And an offer came along that appeared to be too good to refuse. And it was a company in Texas that at the time was called UCell. UCell ultimately, over time, got acquired by Computer Associates. And UCell wanted us, not because of our great products or our 10,000 customers, but they wanted us because of our profitability. They needed to add more profitability into their mix, and so they offered us the number we wanted. And each of us as co-founders made a bit of money that we never expected. It was a large amount of money at the time, but today it would be a very small amount of money.
An exit's an exit, though, right?
An exit is an exit, and it was a great return
Yeah.
for everyone. And all of my co-founders went on to do what they wanted to do with the rest of their lives. I still, to this day, miss working with them because it was terrific to start a company from scratch and
bootstrap the whole thing.
it and really satisfy customers and build great products and suffer through the challenges of growth and the joys of victories and the agonies of small defeats.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated. So you bootstrap a company to start. How do you then think about starting a venture capital firm? I mean, there was a little bit of time in between you became your own VC, but how do you sort of say, hey, I see the seeds of this industry. Not everybody's going to bootstrap it. I'm going to find a way to finance what I think is going to be a big movement, not just a single company idea.
Well, I left Minneapolis, which was step one.
Yeah.
There was a big article in the newspaper saying she took the money and ran. But I had discovered that winter was optional, but you had to afford to leave winter if you wanted to move to California. And now I could afford to leave.
Did you move to the Bay Area then?
I moved to San Francisco.
Okay.
And I fully intended to find another startup and a pack of people that I could work with and do it again. It happened to be an unusual time. I moved here in '84, and it was a great time for companies like Microsoft, but just as I got here, it was the end of '84. It was very shortly after that Lotus, which was one of the top PC companies, had a bad quarter. It was the end of the PC era.
Yeah.
But it was not yet the beginning of the next technology movement, which we called client-server.
Yeah.
So there was a gap. So I had an opportunity to do some strategy consulting for a number of people, which was really good for me.
You worked with Bill Gates and the
With
Microsoft early in their history.
With IBM, with Pricewaterhouse and
Yeah.
their consulting group, so that I was able to get a broader picture of the industry. It was like a gift to me that there was a break. I was a young entrepreneur still, and you always think you know more than you know until you discover that you don't actually know anything that you should know next. But that's the
But it's
truth
that-
about
but it's
being an
that-
entrepreneur.
It's the naivety, though, that gives you the confidence to go pursue an idea, though, right?
It really is having abundant intellectual curiosity,
Yeah.
that you actually don't feel that you are ill-equipped to learn,
Yeah.
that you're always equipped to learn. Because even as a venture capitalist, the word venture looms bigger than the word capitalist.
Yeah.
And there is no handbook for any of us as entrepreneurs. There's a few words of wisdom and a few models of success and failure, but we all have to carve our own path. And it was a great experience for me to see other businesses, to be on the outside of those businesses and look at their strategies. In the case of Microsoft, they were looking to introduce a product, yes or no, on the Unix operating system or not. They decided no.
Wow.
And I got to be part of that thinking. It was a really good
Yeah.
time. And during that time, John Hummer, who is 6'10", I'm 5'2". John went to Princeton and then Stanford, so he's one of these Valley pedigreed guys. And he had already been a venture capitalist for 6 years. He was also a first-round draft pick in the NBA out of Princeton. So my father adored him.
Yeah.
My father never understood any of the technical people, but he finally thought I was on the right path.
Yeah.
And John stalked me for a year and a half and said, I want to start a venture firm focused on software. You should be my partner. One of the consulting things I did during this 2-year period was consult to venture capitalists, and I was convinced none of them would ever figure out what software was.
Oh my gosh.
They showed me tens of broken software companies, and the breaks were really easy to define. It's like their leg is broken, fix
Yeah.
it. Not like, well, there's something internally that's going wrong. They were
Yeah.
obvious breaks. So software is very, very new in the 80s for Silicon Valley as standalone businesses. Finally, John found the right way to get me to start a venture firm. He said, there will only be one venture firm that's the first venture firm focused on software. And if you don't join me, you won't be part of it. He found my real competitive juices.
Yeah, you don't want to miss out on that.
No, you
Yeah,
don't.
that's scarcity there for you.
So then began my first trip into the valley of defeat.
Oh yeah, how so?
We had 133 meetings with venture capitalists. To get started, have to find what's called limited partners,
Okay.
which are endowments, pension funds, other corporations, or very, very, very high net worth individuals.
And these are all conservative investors.
Yes.
They tend to look at what's worked and place their bets based on what's worked, right?
Right, and we have to raise money from them, very much like entrepreneurs raise money from venture capitalists. Well, I don't know any entrepreneurs who've had 133 meetings where venture capitalists have said no and keep on trying to
Yeah.
raise money. It was our 134th meeting that we finally got a yes.
Wow. What were people saying no to? What would the first 133 object to?
They thought that investing in software was a really bad idea in general for a couple reasons. One is the assets walked out the door at night.
Yeah.
Software companies are all about people.
Yeah.
Second is there weren't very many success models. Well, we were raising the fund. I think the first software company, other than Microsoft, before Microsoft, there'd only been one company that hit 100 million in revenues, and that was a company in Atlanta called MSA, and that ran on IBM mainframes. Microsoft was really just starting their growth path, and people didn't really understand that they were an indicator of what was to come in the future for software. So people didn't believe the software pitch at all. And I didn't have anything else to offer. I wasn't going to move to biotech or
Yeah.
semiconductors.
all
John
like it.
could move around. He could
Yeah.
even move to athletics, but
Yeah.
not me. So we
You
persevered.
couldn't shoot a jump shot then, I take it.
Actually, I did pretty good in a jump shot
Yeah.
because I have 4 sisters and 1 brother, and so in order for us to play basketball, we all had to play with my dad. So
So you had that to fall back on.
yeah, I'm better from the line than
Okay,
I am,
okay.
with the jump shot.
More of a point guard.
Yeah, I've always wanted to be a point
Yeah.
guard. Always.
That's funny. So what did the 134th say yes on? What did they see? What did they get?
Well, we finally went back to Minnesota,
Oh, geez.
and where I'm the hometown girl.
Ah.
A big fish in a small pond. although it's a very good pond. And we had heard that 3M had a venture fund, and they were funding some venture capital companies. And we pitched to 3M, and they said yes.
Oh, wow. That is amazing.
Once they said yes, we were super excited, and they took us to lunch. And I was very worried that we would lose our yes because they had a buffet. In Minnesota, we call it a smorgasbord. And they had all the food laid out for the executives, and they brought us to the executive dining room. And John Hummer went through the line first and started taking everything. And I thought, oh my God, all the executives at 3M are behind us, and John's eating all the food. How do I stop him?
He's 6'10". He's got a
exactly,
lot to fill up, right?
He needs a lot of fuel,
Yeah.
a lot more than me.
Yeah.
And also, he's a big eater, and these are polite Minnesota people.
Yeah.
But we managed to leave the building with a yes, and 3M called IBM and said, you should see these guys. And they invested in us, and IBM called yet another LP. So once we got the first yes,
You were on the way.
we were on the way.
Wow. Well, you guys have had an amazing run investing in software over the years. What are some of the biggest wins or successes that you're most proud of in your investing career?
We're really proud of a lot of entrepreneurs. Not all of them turn into billion-dollar wins, but we've had enough of those. In our first fund, we funded 16 companies. 8 of them went public. One of the best known is a company called Hyperion.
Yeah.
We funded 2 people, Jim and Bob. Jim and Bob came in. Neither one of them had any pedigree. One was a rocket scientist at NASA Ames. Jim was a sales guy. And they formed what was the first business intelligence company. It had the best IPO of the year when it went public in, I think, 94. And it then got acquired by Oracle for, I think, $3 billion and change, $3.5 billion. And it's still an integral part of S-Base of the Oracle product line. This is multidimensional analysis across many sectors. It's hard to imagine what a breakthrough that was, but there wasn't even a pivot table on a spreadsheet then.
Yeah.
In the second fund, we did a few consumer companies as well. One company that's still around today is called The Knot, XOXO.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize you did The Knot.
Yes, we did several direct-to-consumer deals. That was the only time we did them because we thought we'd throw them in the mix. They were a lot of fun, but they didn't work as well as the enterprise software companies, which is our focus. But I'm very proud of that one.
Yeah.
Husband and wife team, Carly Rooney and David Liu, have done a tremendous job with that company. Still a long-standing public company and a brand known to many people.
Yeah.
As we march along, in recent funds, we just closed our Fund 5, meaning there's no investments left in it. One of the first deals in that fund was Omniture, and that's the web analytics company. That company also had a sensational IPO and then was acquired by Adobe for
Really,
$2 billion.
One of the pioneers in analytics on the web, and really built that whole category.
That's correct.
Yeah, Josh James, an amazing entrepreneur. So.
Right, and Josh actually did more than that, and Omniture did. It really set up Salt Lake City and Utah as a tech center. This is what happens when you get one big successful company, and the entrepreneur then shares the wealth and their knowledge. So it really is called Silicon Slopes now.
Yeah.
We have another company there right now that's doing quite well called Inside Sales. And recently, this year, just in May, a company of ours called MuleSoft, we funded 5 people. In this case, they were in 4 different countries. 1 here, 1 in Malta, 1 in Germany, and 2 in Buenos Aires. The company went public in 2017 at above a $3 billion valuation. And when it went public, we had several hundred people in Buenos Aires. And the Maltese guy had moved here. Our center was here, but we had over 1,000 people. And in May, the company was acquired by Salesforce for $6.7 billion. So we have a lot of experience building at scale, but we always start with the A round.
Yeah.
Meaning most companies we invest have 2 to 10 people.
Yeah.
5 MuleSoft, there were 20 at Omniture. There were probably 10 at The Knot, 2 at Hyperion, and that's very much...
You get in early and really look at the idea. You know, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you obviously based in San Francisco, and maybe this is my perception of this, but I always felt like Hummer-Winblad would invest outside of the Valley more than maybe some of the other venture capital firms. And you could look at Mule was a global company, right, distributed. But you've always sort of looked outside the region and been, I don't know if I say opportunistic, but more open to maybe getting on a plane and flying to a town that was under the radar if it was a great entrepreneur.
Yeah, today we have a company in Portland, a company in Minneapolis, a company in LA, a company in Washington, D.C., Boston, New York. So we still do that. We do put the companies that we can't drive to. Honestly, it's a little bit higher bar.
Yeah.
Because we can't, in early stage companies, the venture role is a little different than when you get larger. Frequently, your brand is better known than the brand new company that's might even be in stealth mode, meaning keeping silent.
Yeah.
So trying to recruit talent might be challenging. So we frequently participate in interviews and helping bring the talent aboard. That's harder to do if we have to fly there for the next day. So we put the CEO on a higher bar that can you attract excellence without emergency support.
Yeah.
So those companies tend to work out pretty well, even though they are far away. We also look for venture investors, like-minded, like-capable venture investors to syndicate our deals when we have these deals outside of Silicon Valley here. But we like doing them. We don't have, if you look at venture capitalists as a whole, 50% of them went to Stanford or Harvard. I mentioned that earlier. Well, you see entrepreneurs, 50% of them went to Stanford or Harvard, not ours. It's not like we're consciously looking for smart mutts, but we do fund without pedigree.
Yeah.
We're just looking for people that really are entrepreneurs, that they have that they can rise to high physical stamina and intellectual stamina. It's a hard job being in a young company. You know that, Jason. You went into a company that was already in its growth phase, but it still was in its entrepreneurial phase. And everybody's pulling the oars really heavily, and it's not just oar pulling. Everybody is part of the thought process of this living, breathing, building entity that's still trying to place itself on a much larger market map.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about some of those things and how you grow and scale a company after you get your first round of funding. This episode was brought to you by Hint. If you don't know about Hint yet, their brand is all about making everyday chores more enjoyable. It started when Kara Golden, Hint's founder, needed a way to drink more water, but wanted flavor without the sugar and sweeteners that come in most drinks. So she created Hint Water, and I have to tell you, this is one of my favorite go-to drinks every day. I like the peach. It has just a hint of flavor from real fruit essences, and it doesn't have any sugar or sweeteners. But instead of me talking about it, why don't you go try it? Head over to hint.co/welcome to get 30% off. That's right, 30% off your first purchase right now. You won't regret it. All right, so I've got to ask you, so if you look at a company like The Knot or an Omniture or Mule, what is the common thread that you look for when you make an investment, an early stage investment? Because these are different type of companies, right? So how do you sort of find that commonality that fits your investment thesis?
There are a number of things for a venture capitalist. It's important to remember that for really successful companies, we're going to be on their boards for a long time. Mm-hmm. Mule was 10 years old when it went public. DocuSign, not one of our deals, went public this year in year 15.
It's crazy how much longer they're taking to go public.
So first of all, we have to feel that there'll really be mutual respect between us and the entrepreneurs, that we really like these people and we respect them and we're going to trust them and we're going to be willing to be part of their family for a long time.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work out, it can be short.
Yeah. But
still, at that time, trust is even more important. Second is we look for extraordinary communication skills. In fact, I mentioned earlier where people graduated from. I do know where Carly and David did for the Knot, but for some of our companies, I don't even know where the people went to school. I just know they're extraordinarily smart, they're great communicators, and also they can speak in the voice of the market.
That's interesting to hear you say that.
Second,
A lot of VCs, you always hear this like, we're looking for a big market or we think a great product. And so you're talking about trust and storytelling.
Well, that's number one.
Yeah.
So, there are really two phases here. One I'll call the seduction, where you say, hey, these guys and girls are really interesting.
Yeah.
I hope that they're in a big market, can build a great product. So you have to be seduced by these companies.
Yeah.
And I remember when Jim and Bob came in, and they had a scroll. Now, I don't advise theatrics, but theatrics worked in this case. And they had this scroll, and they said, we are going to build this product, this multidimensional analysis product. Nobody was talking about multidimensional analysis. Sounds really boring. And we have talked to all of these customers, and they rolled out the scroll, and they said, pick any name, call any one of them, and they'll tell you that when we finish building this product, they will buy it. Now, in the case of Jim and Bob, they were great communicators. The scroll did have an impact on us. I'm sure they knew we wouldn't pick those names, but before we made the investment, we said, well, we have to check this out. So John Hummer and I actually drove around Silicon Valley with Jim and Bob in the back seat. We'd send them out to meet with chief financial officers of companies here in the Valley, both tech and non-tech. And then we'd send them out of the room and said, well, they told you a story. If they build this product within this time frame, would you buy it? How much would you pay for it? What other products do you see coming down the pike? And they all said, bring it on. We really want this product. So we do this thing called due diligence, because once we decide to invest, we really want to invest. And we do try to size the market. In the case of MuleSoft was an open source company in the beginning, and they had already significant customers that had not only downloaded the product, and this was an enterprise services bus. Now, I have to say that as enterprise software investors, the reason I bring in the Knot is people can know what I'm talking about, but we were not very exciting at cocktail parties.
Yeah.
So.
ESBs are not like the topic du jour on a Friday or Saturday night.
ESBs are big, hard things. And they're your integration bus for what later became an integration platform, partly in the cloud as well. And we talked to a major bank in Europe, and they had downloaded the software and installed it without even talking to anyone. We talked to an airline, and they had downloaded the product and installed it and had it running without talking to anyone. And that told us two things. One is there were no other products in the market that could satisfy them, that they were willing to download and try a product from a company they didn't know very well. And second, that it was a beautiful piece of code and it worked perfectly. So they were well suited for this new market where people took your code and used it. And we also then talked to these people and said, would you recommend it to others? If you were working with this company, what other attributes would you like to see in the company or in the product? And actually that is the fun part of our job, the due diligence phase, because we're talking to the market. Warren Buffett, who is the best investor on the planet, says the market bats last. He likes baseball too. And he also says we only swing at strikes. So I'm not sure that we get all strikes pitched towards us, but we do take to heart Warren's word that you have to talk to the marketplace.
When you so it's interesting when you kind of think about some of these traits of the opportunity. What are some of the things that you look for in a CEO or a founder when you make an investment? Just sort of more on the personality characteristics, that side of the maybe the more the qualitative side of the house.
Software is the reason that 133 people turned us down, is they were worried that the assets would walk out the door at night. And it is a people-based business. So your talent is everything. There might be machines doing a little bit these days,
Yeah.
but ultimately somebody has to write the programs for the machines that do the thinking later. And your ability to attract excellence. When I was a young venture capitalist, I used to say to myself, would I go work for this person? It was my test.
Yeah.
If I had to quit my job today, would I go work there? And it was a really good acid test for me. I'm probably not going to go work for a startup right now.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work for me so well. So it really is just pattern matching in, could this person compete for talent?
Interesting.
Especially in a marketplace with such low unemployment, and also one where your core assets in software companies, engineers, don't go work for money anymore. They go work for missions and markets.
So is the ability to recruit one of the traits that when you kind of think about if you look at sort of your investments, that there's obviously a multitude of factors, but I'm trying to isolate, like there are a couple things that you can find that say, oh, you know what, all of our companies tend to get these one or two or three things right when they turned out to be a big hit.
Well, I'll look at Greg Schott, who is the terrific CEO and was the CEO of MuleSoft. He joined the company when it was quite small, and took it public, and through the acquisition by Salesforce, and is now at Salesforce with the rest of what we call the Muleys.
Yeah.
There were a few attributes of Greg that we'd love to see in everyone. He kept everything at a very high bar. He would leave a position empty versus hire the wrong person. That's hard to do when you're a young company.
Yeah.
You need to get things done. He interviewed the first 1,000 people himself. You couldn't get hired unless you passed Greg's test as well.
Wow.
Second, he was very transparent as a leader what success was for the company. If you walked into MuleSoft in their pre-public days, you could see all the numbers on the boards, the close rates, the renewal rates, the movement of the average selling price. Everybody knew what our compass looked like.
Yeah.
And not every leader is comfortable with that. Second, he valued the mission of the company, and that everybody knew not just mission, but strategy. Every year, he took the whole company for a 3 to 5 day retreat somewhere, every single employee, even when we got into the thousands. And people were rematched with each other. They were there to solve problems. The ability to drive not just a small team, which founders can sometimes do, but to drive a very large global entity. And when you're at 1,000 people, you feel large,
Yeah.
let alone 1,500. And drive it, everybody's driving the same direction. People feel they're contributors. There's total transparency on how you've succeeded and how you failed and where you're going, and that people like to come to work. MuleSoft was always ranked one of the top places to work here, and that gave me as much pride as the company achieving its numbers.
Yeah. Let me take the other side of it then. When you look back at some of your investments that didn't work, like what are some of the common mistakes that you saw? Because I think a lot of folks sometimes when you're in the middle of trying to grow and scale, maybe you raised an A round or a B round, you're in the fight, right? You're in the arena, you're on the field, and life happens fast.
Well, life does happen
Yeah.
fast, and there are some scary statistics for startups, at least for U.S. startups. CB Insights published a report about a year ago of several thousand startups that they tracked. And for every 1,000 startups that get their first investment round, only 400 ever get the next round.
Yeah, the fallout rate is pretty
And
high.
of those 400 that get the next round, only about 200 get to what's called the C round. And very few companies are acquired before the C round. So it's very Darwinian.
Yeah.
What goes wrong? There are a number of common things that go wrong. One is running out of money at the wrong time. And that's on the onus of both the venture capitalist and the entrepreneur, because our job is to help the company determine cash flow early and knowing when to raise.
Yeah.
And a gap of cash where you can't get to the next step, that takes some out of the race.
Yeah.
They just
Is that on the VC or is that on the founder or on both?
It's on both.
Yeah. But do they? Or is
what happens?
Yeah. How does that? How do you get disconnected? Because that seems like a thing that you should be able to manage as a team with your investor.
You should, but you can get disconnected in a number of ways. You have few large customers, one drops out.
Yeah.
So we call this elephant hunting.
Yeah.
You get 3 elephants and no donkeys.
Yeah.
And it's you're highly dependent upon a small number of things. Number 2 is competitors come into the marketplace you don't anticipate. We don't have any lens on the future that's any better than the entrepreneurs. In fact, it's not as good as the entrepreneurs because we're the opportunists and you're the visionary.
Yeah.
So we do have competitive dynamics. Some of the marketplaces that have suffered as a result of this marketing automation, hugely overinvested.
Yeah.
It was great for acquirers, but not for companies. It drove the price of the products down. There was no must-have product. There were always alternatives. So it was really challenging to keep these companies funded because the venture investors that looked at later stage said, well, there's 800 at the starting line. I'll wait for that to sort out and see if anybody survives before I invest next.
Can I ask you that? Because this is one of those areas where if you look at, and it's not just, you could say it's technology, I think maybe is one where we see it happen more often than not, but how do these categories become so overinvested? It's fascinating because VCs are theoretically completely rational, but you do see in some markets 5 or 6 or 7 of things that look very, very similar.
Well, VCs are still people, and there is a lot of herding instinct going on. If one of the challenges for getting funded is it has become very thematic. Last year, if you were a cybersecurity company or somewhere in the automotive,
so like
self-driving, it's like fashion.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of discipline from the venture capitalist to go outside that and to not be part of the club of what's getting invested. And you can see that in, how much self-driving car stuff there is invested, how many scooter companies there are invested. That's craziness. Food delivery companies. Many of these markets,
I mean, why do you need a food
most
delivery company if you have a scooter, right?
Right, exactly.
You just scoot there.
Yeah.
That was like the industry's response.
Well, many of these markets are winner-take-alls. And many of these markets you're competing with very large vendors, not a bunch of startups. But also, if there are too many companies at the starting line, it's more money at the starting line.
Yeah.
And you're in a race versus heads down. So it takes a lot of discipline as a venture capitalist to not herd into the money race. Mm-hmm. And you're not the most popular person at the cocktail party if you don't have a scooter company or a self-driving company or a cybersecurity company, although we're more likely to have the third than the first 2 here. Yeah. But it is true. There is a herding instinct.
Yeah.
And it is challenging for companies that are not in one of the themes to find their investors, but they can. This is where the internet helps you. I always say to companies, go key in the following. If you're an ag company, say CB Insights, ag, they'll list the 50 venture firms that might be scattered across the country that do that smaller sector, which has built some very large companies, by the way. So we try not to be herded.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
You want to be one of the club. You want to be part of this. This is an entrepreneur. It's hard to have strategies that aren't like others. You sit in meetings and you say, well, so-and-so did this. And you go, well, if they zig, maybe we should zag. Yeah. The other thing companies do is they focus on product, not markets. And this is great for angel investors to fund products, but we have to fund businesses. So that means markets. And companies tend to spend way too much time polishing up one thing versus getting engaged with the market, not with a minimum viable product, but a minimum value product. So they have something to deliver value to the market they want to get to know so they can establish that relationship with customers. Mm-hmm. And that is hard to do, to bring a minimum value to a customer. But if it has value, it's more than minimum. It's solving an unmet need.
But you could argue Silicon Valley in general, I think, can become over-obsessed with product, right? Versus sort of this market category discussion. And maybe that's why we see 19 different marketing automation companies, and they look at the product, maybe not the market.
Yeah, it's not just so much obsessed with product, but forgetting about strategy.
Yeah.
Go back to Greg Schott again. I mean, Greg really understood product, but he also really kept his eyes on the prize, on strategy. I also tell entrepreneurs, I didn't go to Harvard, but I've read Competitive Advantage, Michael Porter's book. And in Michael Porter's book, there's a chapter on the value chain. And the value chain is quite complicated. It is reading a textbook, so the younger you are, the easier it is to read. But what Michael Porter says is you should have a small set of assumptions about your business, who your competitors are, what your pricing strategy is. Remember, pricing is strategy. Maybe 5 of these that are assumptions about your business. I did this as an entrepreneur. I wrote them on a whiteboard, and I looked at them every once in a while. And if one of them was false, do something different.
Yeah.
Not totally.
Yeah.
But you don't just pivot around to try to get something right. You have a strategic framework that you built. And it's not something that you need McKinsey to do. It's something that you build. What are my 5 assumptions? If they're still correct, keep on going.
Yeah.
If one of them is false, hey, this competitor is not really my competitor. It is this competitor instead. How does that change my business? That's when you do any kind of pivot of your positioning, your pricing, your go-to-market strategy. But many, many companies, and again, back to who do we fund? We fund these entrepreneurs that we feel can get things done.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous amount to get done. That's the physical stamina. And the ones that can really keep their eye on the prize at the same time. That's the intellectual stamina and the ability to think strategically.
I like that. We're going to take a quick break and talk about some of the big opportunities you actually see today.
Which American company started with a guy in a garage, was featured on Shark Tank, and now has over 1 million customers? Hint, they're reducing crime in neighborhoods everywhere. Here's Ring Video Doorbell founder Jamie Siminoff with his secret to success.
It's true. In just a few years, we've had huge growth. We've hired hundreds of people, expanded our warehouse, and we're shipping millions of units a year, all while making sure our customers are happy. I've had lots of things to worry about, but I never worry about our finance and accounting because we use NetSuite from Oracle. From the beginning, NetSuite let me see what's going on with my business in real time, from revenues to expenses, customers and orders, even HR. I run my business from a dashboard right on my phone. NetSuite has been my business management system from 10 to a team of over 1,000, and NetSuite will be my choice as we continue to innovate and grow.
Go to netsuite.com/ring to see how Jamie scaled his business. You'll also get our free guide titled Overcoming Your 5 Obstacles to Growth. That's netsuite.com/ring for your free guide and the story of a great American company. netsuite.com/ring.
So I want to ask you next, sort of, given you've seen the PC era come and go, you were here for client server, you obviously made a lot of bets early on when it was called on-demand computing and open source, and it's now the cloud. Question for you now is, what do you see happening in terms of the next 10 years? Like, where are you placing your bets today? Where do you think the most opportunity exists in the software market?
There are a number of changes going on that were early on. So it's really hard to look more than 5 years ahead for anyone. But if you look at large corporations, they look more and more like software companies.
Yeah.
They have more and more software entrepreneurs. There is a tremendous amount of software being built. Jason, you once referred me to a software company that I'm now on the board of called Sonotype. And they man the thing called the Central Repository, our Nexus. And that's where coders go now to get components to use in their code. Last year, there were 85 billion components checked out of Nexus. 85 billion.
All our businesses are becoming software businesses.
Exactly.
One way or another, yeah.
So that means that every part of software is still changing. How you build software. We have a new category called DevOps. which is development and operations. There's a bunch of young companies, meaning they're probably 50 to 100 million in revenue, but we'll see them shortly, maybe on the public markets. GitHub, just acquired by Microsoft for an enormous amount of money. A little Australian company with, I think, a $15 billion market cap now called Atlassian.
This has got to be one of the craziest stories ever in the software space, how they've become so prevalent within their customers coming out of Australia.
Right. Well, how they became prevalent is a good example. There was a product called Microsoft Project from the PC era. It never really went into the client server area, didn't go into the cloud area yet, and they came out with Jira. And
Jira's everywhere.
Jira's everywhere, and it's a much broader product than that. So we do see software being re-architected almost everywhere. People use the term digital transformation, but only about a third of companies are near complete on realizing the opportunities they have from software. Second, cloud. If you look at the growth of Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, IBM Cloud, they're enormous growth rates. That means we're young in those markets as well. And the power of those clouds. Anyone who has a cloud computing offering, like NetSuite, they probably have under-leveraged all the data that they have, anonymous data. And this is not data that they will use for showing us advertisements. This is data that you'll use for best practices, for modeling businesses. We haven't even gotten there yet, using the power of what do we do with all the stuff in the cloud. Although, we see what happens when you use it for a business like advertising with Google and their advertising business, which is still their big moneymaker. But we're very, very early there as well. On the standpoint of what we'll see the impact on our daily lives, if you ask anybody, do you have Amazon device that you talk to? Do you talk to Siri? Do you talk to a Google device?
It's all the voice.
It's all voice. And it's more than just voice. It is our new interface to other things as well. My Amazon devices now turn yellow when a package has been delivered, so I don't have to read my email. I can just, and it'll tell me they've been delivered if I want Amazon to talk to me. I can basically order things, which I do. So people are moving slowly but rapidly into ambient computing, which people have talked about since the early Apple ads of the desks will come alive and we'll talk to them, but we're there. And new tools will come out there as well. So we're in a very rapid change environment for what requires very substantial software. I can't talk about what will be much more consumable, and we're all close to self-driving with how our cars operate. Most of us have electric cars. So 5 years from now, if we look back to things that are less than 10 years old, when did AWS come about? 10 years ago. Hardly anything that we're talking about today is more than 10 years old. Facebook. And, with it becomes the challenges that we have to deal with when Facebook becomes the world's media. What does that mean for us, good and bad?
I got to ask you this. You obviously spent a lot of time around business intelligence and trying to glean insights from data. I'm curious, there's so much hype around artificial intelligence and machine learning, and everything now is AI powered, or there's a bot behind something. What's your view on this sort of AI and machine learning as it relates to business? Maybe take the consumer stuff to the side.
As far as machine learning, I'm very positive on that, and that is something where I'm on the board of a company in Minneapolis that uses econometric modeling to tell you how well your advertising spends are working and which pieces drive which, and it's all machine learning. And it really is dependent upon people having access to the data, which they've all just recently got. So if you have your data in a good setup, you can use machine learning in very many ways. And that, we're already there. Google, Facebook, Microsoft have all open sourced pieces of deep learning so that entrepreneurs are now starting to use machines that actually learn versus the machines kind of crunch them and model them. So we're really, really early on what I'll call true deep learning versus just machine learning. The machine is running according to certain modeling techniques versus the machine actually is learning and telling us stuff that we didn't know. Certainly in artificial intelligence and machine learning, when we talk about voice in natural language processing, that is amazing. I mean, we have seen variants of natural language processing for 30 years, and they've all been pretty crummy. And it's pretty amazing that you can actually walk up to your speakers or whatever and just talk in your normal voice. I have a slight Minnesota accent, which I try to hide. It has no problem with that. And really converse with machines. That's all machine learning as well. So machine learning, we're pretty far along. Deep learning, some vendors are further along. It's a big race between Microsoft and Google, I would say right now, and Amazon, in who'll get there with what. But it's going to happen. I don't think it will wipe out all of our jobs. It seems to be creating new jobs. But it's pretty exciting.
I'm curious on that front because you if you read there's a lot of press and stories around how AI is going to eliminate a ton of work. It's a very Malthusian view of sort of the world. Where do you stand on sort of what do you think is going to happen with sort of AI as it really infiltrates and becomes more mainstream? Does it wipe out classes of jobs, or does it create more opportunity for folks?
Well, I'm paid to always think of the glass half full. And to see uncertainty and complexity as opportunity. So you have to keep that in mind. And certainly this is uncertainty and complexity. And with the glass half full, we've seen lots of changes. I look at the jobs that I performed in high school, and thank God nobody performs them as humans anymore. And, sorting and, sending teletypes, telexes, and things like that machines can do for you. So you do want the world, things to get smarter so you have better jobs. It will, I think, turn the axis again to people having not just deep technical skills, which we desperately need now for the current jobs, into having more creative skills, into really how do we leverage all this technology into our professions is not just a technical challenge, it's a human challenge, but we will. I think that also people...
A liberal arts education might become in vogue in more than a STEM education in 10 years, who knows?
Well, I went to a liberal arts college and got STEM majors, so I recommend that too.
You can do both, actually.
You can do both. And I do notice that many of the companies, like Google is a good example, recruits heavily from the West Coast, liberal arts college, Pomona, Scripps, the Claremont colleges. So it's not that companies are ignoring this. We still have to be able to communicate our value propositions. We have to figure out, does the technology have any value, or is it just cool? But there is a lot of boring stuff that machines could do for us. And so we're not to the point where we're stripping out, we're carbon-based pets. Bill Gates told me years ago that it would be 2050 when I'd have to worry about being a carbon-based pet. So I've got a few years left.
We've got a few years. We're okay for a little while. I want to end and get a little bit of your take on the overall market for venture financing and what's going on, because we talked a little bit about how some of these sectors get overhyped. Do you think there's too much money in the private markets today, chasing sort of a fairly scarce amount of quality companies?
If you're a company looking for an A round, interestingly, in this year we might hit an all-time low on A round funding.
Interesting.
Well, we hit an all-time high in venture funding, not an all-time high, but a very high number in venture funding. If you look at the numbers, the number of companies globally that get an A round, a true venture A round, has been pretty constant over the last 10 years. In the US, it's about 3,000 companies. You add a couple thousand more. So that hasn't changed very much. It's at the top end. So if you get from your B to your C and you are a real business, there is so much money, and that is a question of, is money a competitive advantage? Does money at that level help companies have the same amount of discipline, something you and I talked about earlier, as they would if the liquidity event for them would have to be either sale or being a public entity? Companies can put off going public longer because they can get tons of money as private companies, especially if they're operating at a predictable large scale.
Yeah.
We have lots of competitors at large scale too, so it's also a little scary. Can all these competitors reach some value for all shareholders?
Well, these unicorn, I don't know how you feel on this, but this idea of a unicorn as a milestone, which is, where your private company's valued in excess of $1 billion, to me seems like one of the craziest ways to think about the value of a company in terms of looking at what a late stage or a later stage investor thinks the company's worth. And it seems like the wrong thing to be focused on. But
there were $19 billion invested in U.S. unicorns this last quarter. $19 billion.
Yeah.
And that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
All of that money did not come from standard issue venture capitalists. You also have
a lot of FOMO going on in terms of other investors then, I take it?
Well, you have private equity coming down to venture capital, and for those of you who don't know what private equity versus venture capital is, venture capitalists build companies. Private equity companies traditionally go into companies that have been around a while and remodel them. Yeah. We build from scratch, they remodel the buildings. Well, they've come from remodeling back into building because they see this as lucrative. Second is we have some new entities like Masa Son's Vision Fund. Billions and billions and billions of dollars giving companies $200 million at a time. And some of these companies are not that old as companies. It's unclear. There is a tendency for companies, if they get money, they'll spend it. Yeah. Especially if they're young companies. Yeah. And they'll spend it in a race. And we talked earlier about how if you're in a race with other companies, I don't believe you can buy customers, no matter who you are. That the market bats last again. That customers are very technically astute. They are very discriminating as consumer buyers. They hold onto their wallets until they decide to spend them. And that reality distortion field sometimes is created for companies that believe they can buy the customers.
Well, it's been amazing to me to see it's really probably been the last 4 or 5 years, is that you've seen IPOs become down rounds, right? Where the IPO valuation of a company is much lower than the last private valuation that a company receives. And until recent, I don't think I'd seen that in 15, 20 years. I can't even remember when that happened.
Yeah, it's also the job of the board of directors to approve these financings. Now, by the time you get large enough to take the kind of money people take before their IPO, you usually have a diversified board, independent directors and some venture capitalists. But it also does require discipline for the company and the board to say, are we really looking for a high valuation, or are we looking for just a certain amount of cash from the right investors? Yeah. Again, the seduction to, ring the chime and say I'm a unicorn. Yeah. And that down round would be painful to me at an IPO. So
hurts your ability to retain your people too, or even attract new people.
Right, because and the reason it does hurt your ability to retain the people is that your stock price is usually not your stock price, but your share price as a private company, which are your options for your employees, is tied to the valuation of your funding rounds. Yeah. So that means that when you go public,
you're burying people.
So you have to earn your way up to a higher valuation. That may not be bad if you really decide we must go public now and we can build up to that valuation. But if you don't, it's very punitive in many ways.
Do you think it's good that these companies are effectively doing their IPO and their secondary in the private markets, or should they be going public and just raising the capital that way?
There is a good value for, a good reason for the secondary sales, in that when we took Hyperion public, it was called Arbor when it went public, changed its name to Hyperion after they acquired a company. They were 4.5 years old. They were on this fast rise between 25 million in revenue to over 50. And that was the
sweet spot back then, right?
Right. When we took MuleSoft public, they were just past their 10th anniversary as a company, and they had way over 100 million in revenues going into the filing process. So we're asking the employees to just not have any liquidity for a long period of time. So it does help to take some of the anxiety off the table to do a round with secondaries, if you really are going to stay the course and do this, if there is a strategy for doing this. But you really want to make that secondary open to all employees, so that there is a small liquidity event for everybody. And you're asking them to work for you for a long period of time, to keep rowing those oars and thinking about this every day.
Yeah. When you kind of think about the, this part of this cycle that we're in, where there's an abundance of capital, how do you think this ends?
I do think that you will see some overfunded sectors.
Yeah.
It's hard to think that there's going to be 8 scooter companies or 5 super successful autonomous vehicle software companies, but there'll be some. Mm-hmm. And we, in most of these markets, will be. It's interesting today. In the olden days, there was always one big winner. Yeah. When we started our fund, IBM was the company you were terrified of. As we got going, Microsoft you were terrified of. Now there's not one. Of the 10 most valuable companies in the world, 7 of them are software companies. Facebook, Microsoft, Google, companies like Alibaba, Tencent. So there's not just one big winner anymore, but there's not 100. And so there will be winner-take-all markets, and that means that the losers might not lose as poorly if they're acquired along the way or whatever, but there could be large sums of money lost from private companies battling it out against too many multiple private companies. And they are battling against Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Alibaba. What really does end cycles is not so much too much money, although that did kind of end the internet cycle, but other macro events. Trade wars, if they got out of hand, could really be nasty. We're feeling the effects of immigration laws. We should have better immigration laws here, where when we bring college people, anybody who gets a PhD in this country, we should beg them to stay and invite them to be citizens, because we are in a global software market competing. So it really is talent shortages, economic stuff that could really change things. Certainly bad regulation. We're largely an unregulated industry versus good regulation. We're competing globally now. The second largest area other than the US where investments are occurring is China. It's not Europe, it's China. So, we have new competitors that we are having a hard time as US companies finding our place in China. All the big companies talk about it. So
there's a different set of rules there.
I don't think it ends for all, but it will end for some. And when it ends for companies that have raised billions and billions of dollars, it's, hopefully we don't see any Theranoses. I don't think we're seeing, really fraud here. We're just seeing a lot of big races with a lot of horses that are have a lot of money behind them.
Yeah, well, it's one of those periods in time where you kind of think about a platform shift, right, being a thing that drove, some new disruptive technology. Here you have multiple shifts happening simultaneously, right?
Yeah, we're all on the same platform. We all have to use each other's tools. We can choose between using, Azure, AWS, Google, IBM, who's ever, Oracle's cloud.
Yeah.
I mean, we can pick a cloud, but we're not going to do clouds from scratch anymore. We're going to be using young companies' development tools. We'll probably be using Atlassian as well as Microsoft. We've got to pick a database. It could be Oracle, it could be Amazon now. Oracle's got new competitors. In a market they've owned forever. And so every market is not up for grabs, but everybody feels competitive pressure. Mm-hmm. I think there are only a few markets where they seem that the winner take all has all, which is Google and advertising, but very few.
Yeah.
So, the next 5 years is really, like you're saying, sorting out. Everybody places their bets. The bets are bigger on some of these emerging markets and scooters.
We won't see a scooter company in your portfolio, I'm pretty sure.
Well, we can only fund 100% software companies, so even if we wanted to, our charter does not allow for that. But you've got some big battles out there, Uber, Lyft, and other global companies competing against them. Those are not small battles.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of big private companies that we don't have any view into their, the travel sector. Airbnb, we don't know their numbers, but we all are assuming they're doing terrifically well. At the same time, you have, companies that have been around since the dot-com time, like Priceline, doing extremely well. So companies don't instantly die ever in the software market. They just lose their growth mojo.
Yeah. Well, we've unfortunately ran out of time, but I want to go back to one maybe final piece of advice. For someone who had 133 no's, what made you get up and go get that next yes? How do you keep fighting?
It was the first time in my life that I'd ever heard the word no, really. Even my own parents, when I asked, do we have any rules? Do we have to be home by a certain time? My parents said, use your own good judgment. And the rule that I have for every entrepreneur is use your own good judgment. My good judgment said, keep on going.
I love that. With that, we unfortunately ran out of time. But Ann, thanks so much. It's great. We have to do this again.
Thanks.
We'll do it again soon. Thank you so much. It was great. Thank you so much to Ann for coming on this episode of the GrowWire podcast and sharing her insights into the venture capital world. I also want to shout out to everyone who made it possible, our sponsors over at Blue Microphones, Hint, and Ring as well, plus our editing crew at Lampstand and our producer, Kendall Fisher. Adios!
You just listened to the GrowWire podcast with host Jason Maynard. Make sure to tune in every week for another episode full of tips, tools, and strategies to take your personal and professional growth to the next level. Until next time.